Gambia's tourism industry has flourished from just 300 tourists in 1965 to more than 160,000 in 2017. About 20% of the country's economy is now generated by holidaymakers. But there is a dark side, the sexual and labour exploitation of children and young people in and around tourist hotspots. UNICEF's office in the Gambia is now urging stronger measures to protect children from violence, abuse and exploitation. Their appeal comes 4 months after UN Special Rapporteur visited the country. She reported on alleged cases of commercial sexual exploitation of children at hotels, beaches and restaurants. And in 2016, one NGO reported that children are being trafficked for exploitation, primarily with predatory tourists. For more on this, Lamine Fati joins us from the Gambian district of Bakau. He is National Coordinator at the Child Protection Alliance. In the capital Banjul, Sandra Latouf, she is a representative at UNICEF, the Gambia. And Mustafa Mane is a journalist and founder of Their Voice Must Be Heard. That's a human rights organisation aiming to protect women and girls. He's in the Gambian village of Kartong. Hello, everybody. I'm just going to give our viewers a warning because this is a very distressing conversation to actually have about children, young people, women being exploited. But Lamine, there was a big famous tabloid in the United Kingdom that drew attention to some of the exploitative activities of tourists. I'm going to show a couple of pictures. I'm just going to warn everybody at home so they understand what's about to happen. So this is a gentleman with a toddler. The gentleman has a British accent. The toddler does not. Much older gentleman with, again, a little kid in the ocean. Let me just show you one more here. Two gentlemen here. I'm not even sure if gentleman's the right appropriate word. Two men here with two young local kids frolicking on the sand. I mean, how big a problem is protecting children in the Gambia when so many people go there for sex tourism?
Well, I think the fact of the matter is that, well, sex tourism actually is on the prevalence in the Gambia, especially around the tourist development areas. Even though we have laws that are kind of like in place that are supposed to protect these children from all form of exploitation or abuse. But because of the laws are not that enforced, as a result of that, it has opened that room for children to be vulnerable to tourists coming to the Gambia for leisure or to, kind of like on their holidays. I think the pictures that you have shown, actually, these are one of the indicators that actually these are some of the things that are actually able to indicate that child sex tourism is actually happening. Sometimes too, it's you might take it as some of these issues have been kind of like constructed socially, the fact that you have a population of 60% who are living below the poverty line.
Sure.
So as a result of that, you have these tourists coming to the Gambia who are actually receive or warm-heartedly to feel like, well, these are people that would actually cause no harm to this family. So the family actually will see these tourists, visitors as friends, as people that they could be able to count on to help their financial gains.
Right.
But underneath, actually, they end up, exploiting these young children sexually.
Mustafa, let me bring you into the conversation. You live in one of these tourist areas. How do you know if a child is being abused or maybe being groomed in any way? How would you know? How do you see that happening?
Like, being from a tourist destination area that is Kachang is indeed something that, like, we have been saying. Like, it's very hard.
All right, we are going to try and get Mustafa back. It's a little tricky with that line that we have to him, but we'll come back to him, try and get him back into the show. In the meantime, let me just go to Sandra. Sandra, UNICEF the Gambia, you are very aware of this issue. How do you know if a child is being trafficked or exploited in any way?
What I would like to say is that these pictures is not the starting block. We have numbers of reports that during the last few years, we try to really address it with the government and partners. So in terms of sexual exploitation, it's a big challenge we have. And one key element. It's really to ensure that the information comes to the right people to be able to reinforce the law, because this country have very strong law for protection of the children. So we talk about exploitation, but we can also talk about child labor. We can talk about punishment. We can talk about different type of violence against the children. We have a law for that. We have the Child Act from 2005 and different laws that the government have reinforced recently with the statement on zero tolerance for any type of violence that the Ministry of Women, Children and Social Welfare have highlighted. But also most important, we have a new Ministry of Women, Children and Social Welfare. It's almost only 1 year that we have this new ministry. Having a ministry which coordinates all the issue around the child. Today we talk about sexual abuse. We can also talk about child labor. We can also talk about one challenge we have in the country about FGM. We can also, this new ministry, I think we have a good opportunity not only to coordinate and respond on real time, but also to prevent. We also have key partners around the table to support the government, like the tourism board.
Right. It sounds like, Sandra, there's a lot of partnership going on. I'm wondering how much action, Mustafa, you're actually seeing. How much action are you seeing, Mustafa? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. We are seeing actions from like a tourist work company. That is indeed a sign that something is going wrong. Like I said, ignorance is something that is really disturbing the people of my area, that is the coastal part of the Gambia, because Katong is part of the coastal part of the Gambia where so many tourists are visiting. For example, like if you talk to people about the effect of sex tourism, they wouldn't believe it, because those are people that have a huge dependence on tourism. And anytime they have a visitor, a tourist visitor who visited their family, maybe buy something, they can go out with the kids, because this is when the family actually believe that these are people who are supporting me. So it comes up an extent that people hardly talks about sex tourism, or hardly talks bad about the tourists, because those are people that people believe that they uplift a poverty from them. Like it's not about like sex. It's not only about sex tourism, but it's also about exploitation.
Sure.
Because like when they visited the areas of like the people areas like Katong, the kids, some of them will even dodge from school just to follow them. And that really affects them.
Lamine, I see you nodding. Go ahead. What's behind that nod?
Yeah, no, basically, I think what he's trying to say, well, we have so many enabling factors that kind of like exposes children. Well, he has talked about one when we talk about the issue of poverty. But as I said earlier, Gambia is a country where at least 50% of the population are living under the poverty line. So as a result of that, you have children being kind of like being engaged by their parents to get into this petty trading, or begging on sometimes too, as Sandra had highlighted. Sometimes we have been seen them being exposed to what we call child labor. And even though too, when you come to the realities on the ground, we, as Sandra said, we have good laws in the Gambia. Well, when you look at the Tourism Act 2007, actually talks about, well, there's kind of like a restriction of even having the children to be around the tourist development area. So where actually we have gone to the extent that children now been exposed to those areas been engaged around the tourist development areas, and then are now been kind of like been easily accessed by the tourists, or sometimes even not by the tourists, but you also have Gambians who will able to also take the opportunity. But these are young girls who are in the
there's money to be made here. This is something that Louise Hunt, a journalist, shared with us as we were working out how do we explain this better, this conversation better. Louise Hunt makes this point about poverty. Let's have a look.
Poverty is the main enabler of abuse. Nearly half the population in Gambia lives below the poverty line, even more so in rural areas. And the tourism sector is one of the biggest income generators. There tends to be quite a lot of interaction between children and tourists. many children won't be going to school because their families can't afford school fees. So it is one of the ways that children may be trying to earn some income for their families. So there are opportunities for abuse there.
I'm just looking at our YouTube comments there, following you guests as you're speaking, and Elmi Fahad here says, you will do some impossible things for money. I'm wondering, Lamine, do people really know what's going to happen to their kids? Do they know that and are they okay with that? Because what other options do they have?
Well, some of these things actually might not be true. You might not also be too subjective to the fact that parents get to know about this. Sometimes, too, these are some of these issues actually or cases do happen in an isolation. But the overall perception about having a tourist friend is about, oh, well, because there are opportunities in where actually this particular tourist will be able to at least contribute financially, financially to the well-being of the family. So sometimes, too, well, because of they don't have that that kind of like not trusting, because they entrust these tourists to the extent that, well, they wouldn't have any doubt as to they would definitely get into the issue of being sexually abused. Sometimes too, because when you look at the culture and our cultural norms and values, you hardly think that, well, a child of 9 or 6 years will be raped by any individual. So I think there's a whole lot of like betrayal of trust between the visitors and the families. Some of them actually will come in a form of being these so-called philanthropists that will start sponsoring students. But at the end of the day, parents would entrust them to go out with certain places. Sometimes even some of these abuses don't actually happen in the homes. Sometimes they move out, have their own private residence where they will be able to have access to these kids. And then, as Mane said, we also have this culture of silence as well too. Sometimes, too, you might have situations where parents are actually aware of some of these abuses, but they will take it, even where you want to have an intervention, they will take it as so you want to serve as an obstacle to their welfare. Sometimes they will say, well, you don't want their progress around some of these issues. So I think there's a whole lot of things that actually will do contribute to the fact that, well, yes, Mane?
Yeah, Mr. Go ahead.
I think, when we talk about child in the Gambia, it's anyone that is between the age of 18. But it's sad that in the Gambia that we have been saying it. Like, I'm from a community, I'm from an area that is weak when it comes to tourism. Like, so many tourists are coming here. But you saw some tourists with people, like, with girls that are like below the age of 18. Lamin said it, we have policies, we have regulations here that should prevent that happening. But those who are entitled, those who are given the power to regulate those things are people who are neglecting it. For example, just visit a tourist, like visit a beach, you will see an old tourist, very old, with a kid.
Why doesn't anybody ask about that? When you see a very old person with a very young Gambian child, why wouldn't somebody say, what are you doing with that child? Why is it allowed to continue? Whoever, a policeman, an auntie, like an African auntie, another tourist, why wouldn't anybody say anything? Does that happen?
Well, I think this is where we talk about the issue of gross incompetency also too, when it comes to the issue of people who are at the helm of affairs to make sure that our laws or policies are being enforced. Unfortunately, we have a system whereby most of these law enforcement officers don't actually get to know about the laws or the policies that are in place to protect children. But I remember once of a time I was engaged in a conversation as to see, well, when you look at the Tourism Offensive Act, it's quite clear that children should not be unaccompanied or should not be actually unaccompanied within the tourist development areas, but yet they have access to the beach, even though you have a series of I don't know whether they call them checkpoints. Those checkpoints supposed to be basically to screen as to who goes to the beach or not. But because of you have people who have this laissez-faire attitude, they don't actually care.
Yeah.
You allow everybody to just go anyhow in and out of the beach. And I think one thing we need to change, the notion that we need to change as a country in order to protect our children, is the issue that we feel that when we have this white superiority that whenever they come, they could be able to have their free way to wherever they want to go.
Now we're speaking candidly. The power of white privilege. Let me share something with you here. There is a fierce conversation going on. Jimmy, who's on YouTube right now, he is commenting all the way through. He says they do it openly and boldly. Here, right here. And then he goes on, the authorities and locals should be stoned for their complicity. That's a little extreme. Sandra, maybe it's not when we're talking about paedophilia with kids. Sandra, what action can be taken here? Because this is just practiced openly.
I think perhaps we should not generalize. It's happening.
We have lost the audio for Sandra, just as she was about to tell us something very important. Sandra, we'll come back to you. We can't hear you right now. There was something I want to share with you. This is really important, and this is about the UK. Talking about the Gambia, but these tourists come from somewhere. Tabloid in the UK, The Sun. Sickening, I've seen UK paedophiles preying on Gambian children, and it's Britain's fault, says UN official. And then a big travel company, you may have seen the news, a big travel company called Thomas Cook, that collapsed in recent months. And it says that this collapse of this UK travel company will impact the tourism sector in the Gambia, making what young people are having to do even more extreme because of the lack of tourism. Lamine, laying the responsibility, or some responsibility, at the foot of the British authorities too. What do you say to that?
Well, basically, this particular publication, I was one of those that the sales reporter happens to interview. But when actually, when you look at the proper analysis of the article, you will be able to realize that actually, well, even though the reporter is able to was able to pinpoint certain key issues that we think that, well, he capitalizes that, well, because of the lapses we have in our law enforcement, and he was able to brought out actually the realities on the ground. Just the fact that, well, you have what they call some of these issues has been sensationalized as how they are. I remember because when you look at the issue of being Thomas Cook coming to the Gambia, and not then before there was not all these issues of child sex tourism in the country. For God's sake, child sex tourism in this country has been here for ages. And then what actually the reporter or the journalist was trying to portray here is the fact that, well, all these things are happening as a result of Thomas Cook not coming to the Gambia. So for me, I have seen in this particular article, even though yes, he has actually, exposed the bitter truth, but also I think there was this agenda to say, well, because all this sex tourism is happening as a result of Thomas Cook not coming to the Gambia. And I had this quote where he said, because of the bankruptcy of Thomas Cook.
And obviously sex tourism existed before Thomas Cook,
exactly.
and many years before that. Let me share with you some thoughts from Twitter guests. This is Ibrahim. He says the stigma attached to exploited girls is the reason why most victims don't speak up or report the incidents. That's even beyond the issue of poverty and just being able to continue to live. And then this is so important, and I know, guests, you've touched on this. Let's dig deeper into this. The laws are there but not enforced. Implementing laws are problems in Africa, especially the Gambia. We need to act now. Mustafa, go ahead. Acting now.
Acting now is the biggest question, because those who are supposed to act are people who are, like I said, I keep saying, they are not supportive when instead they are encouraging it. If the people, if the tourists can pass those securities down there who are paid, who we pay through our tax money, who is going to stop them? This, for me, it's not about being a tourist. It's about being a human being, because the kids or the child that have been caused or that have been exploited will suffer for the rest of their life. To enforce the law, again, many things are involved. Most of those people who are involved on this kind of activities are people with a little money, and they can do whatever. They can bribe and go free. They can even bribe the local people who catch them red-handed. They can do whatever. So the only thing that we can do is the government need to come out, not to attack people who are talking about sex tourism. This is not about sending tourists away. It's about speaking the hard part. Because the tourists will come and go, but the Gambia future will remain. And most of the kids, most of the children who are exploited are going to be the leaders in the future. If those people grow with that stigma, then our future is not going to tell well. So enforcing the law is still a problem. And I don't see any changes now, because the people who should do this are the people who are supporting it. Are the people who should condone it are the people who are keeping mute. Because all these tourist destination areas, if you go there, you find security there. Most of those people who are engaging on this activity are leaving. Yeah, Lamina.
Yeah, Mustafa, I think, well, basically, as Sandra said, there could have been a lot more. It's the fact that, well, we need to see how best we are more proactive as a country and as child right advocates or actors. Because the fact remains that we are actually more reactive to situation than trying to address the situation before it happens. No, for me, it's about now, how do we look at this issue as a national issue? And, you know, Sandra is there. UNICEF has been playing some great role. UNICEF has been in the champion of protecting children in the Gambia, and they have touched every aspect of this country. So I think it's about how do we now go and have a national approach where we go back to the drawing board and see government, civil society organizations, UN agencies to see actually how do we kind of like create a roadmap that will be able to see an effective coordination of what we do as a country rather than a specific entity. I know obviously, yes, there are a lot of gaps to be filled.
Sure.
Well, civil society organization needs to further strengthen in capacity building around some of these.
Sure. I mean, you partner with Sandra and UNICEF the Gambia. Let me just show this for our audience, because I think this is really important. UNICEF the Gambia calls for stronger measures to protect children from violence, abuse and exploitation. And something that I found very encouraging, and this was a Children's National Assembly for the Gambia. Look at who's at the table, right? If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. The kids are right here saying, this is what we want, this is what we need. This was so encouraging for me to see that young people here were talking about their situation and how important it was that they were protected. Sandra, you have seen some progress happening in terms of exploitation of kids in the Gambia. What is that progress?
Thank you very much to show the work that our child parliament are doing. And this is very recent. It's only last year that they have been elected. It's 105 children who are the voice of the children in the Gambia. Because when we talk about poverty, when we talk about community acceptation or silence, I think yes, it's the reality, but it's not enough. We need to have much more voice of the children themselves and the youth and the girls in particular for sexual abuse, but not only the girls. We have some report about also boys. What we need to really see is how we can support the government with much more system strengthening on child protection.
What does that mean, Sandra? Just very briefly, because you're going into development speak. What does that mean to the toddler on the beach with a middle-aged man?
When we talk about law reinforcement, when you show the pictures, so if everybody say, we saw it, we take pictures. Yes. What we need to do now, acting. Acting is not taking pictures. Yes. It's asking the social worker, can be a police, can be any actors, including the colleagues who take the
Sandra,
pictures. The people
you make so much. It makes so much sense. Don't take a picture, act. Sandra Latoufis from UNICEF, the Gambia. We also had in this conversation Lamine Fati for the Child Protection Alliance and Mustafa Mane. He is from an organisation called Their Voice Must Be Heard. Thank you for sharing all of your voices with us. Let me end here on my laptop with this quote and tweet from Bakary Fofana. Law enforcement of Gambia has to take this issue as a serious matter. They must join hands with the local civilians to tackle this issue as soon as possible.